welcome back. I've got Dr. Bruce Vojak on the line. Bruce, how are you?
I'm good. How about yourself, Michael?
I am really good. Really looking forward to this conversation. You do a ton of amazing work. So why don't you share a little bit about you and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Sure, great. Just to give you a little bit of background on who I am and where I came from. I started out really doing a deep dive in domain expertise in engineering. I studied electrical engineering, went on for a PhD. I spent a few years at a federally funded defense lab. After that, I worked in industry, both in corporate and business unit activities. And throughout that time, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand how organizations succeed in innovation in general. And then after those experiences, I was at the University of Illinois and had an opportunity to conduct some research and started exploring it a little bit more purposefully. So that's really one of the things that I thought might be of interest to some of the people in your audience.
Oh, most definitely. And, the organizations, just thinking in recent years, during the pandemic, a lot of organizations had to innovate and change things. And even now with AI, organizations are looking at different ways to innovate, utilizing these new tools. But even more than that, it goes back to when an organization is trying to figure out who they are or where they're at a given point in time.
Right.
A question that I often ask myself and ask organizations as well is, okay, let's go back in time when you launched this, or if you were around when the organization launched. What was the idea behind it? What were you trying to accomplish? What was your mode or motive basically to put a dent in the universe? What were you trying to accomplish, and have you accomplished that, and how did you do it? And just have them start thinking and pausing, because innovation takes time and reflection, and it also some creativity. And what I find time and time again, when the day-to-day pace of the work life can be, unless you're intentional about it, the opportunities to innovate, you blow right past them because you're so focused on doing the job instead of, all right, what are we doing? And I'm always a big fan of organizations that continue to innovate. We think of the classic organizations, going back to IBM and Hewlett Packard and even Apple, and there's constant innovation going on. So, what is there a secret sauce for organizations that tend to be more innovative than others?
It's a great question. There's a quote that I'll share with you. I actually had to go back and look it up, but it's from Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, the first line in the book. It says, "All happy families are alike, and each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." And I think that applies to innovation, that there are some patterns, as you're asking, that you see time and again in these organizations. Um, it's an understanding that when you hit maturity, or even before you hit maturity, you should be thinking about renewal. And it could be, could be maturity of your product, your company, of the industry that you're in. And it's really an opportunity then to survive and thrive. So the companies that are always kind of thinking about it, and I make a point to say that not every innovation investment will be successful, but that you're going to learn things. And it's not even a fail fast. It's just, will we gain a better grasp on our customers, on our industry, even on our workforce? So that's one. I think the other is that there are processes and tools, as you just mentioned. Um, and those are things that, while they don't necessarily help you succeed, if you have good processes and tools, they often help a company not fail, if you will, because they're usually stopgaps that keep you kind of, if you will, in the guardrails. And then finally, I'm convinced that it's the people that you have in the organization. You mentioned a moment ago about going back and asking the question, basically, why are we here? How did this start? Even if the company decides to reframe that discussion, having that consideration of that topic is, I just think it's really important. So going back to some principles, and one last quick thing I'll mention, you mentioned about people don't have time. I don't remember the numbers, but I've heard quotes that basically say that over 90% of executives believe that strategy is important, and the same number essentially don't have time to pursue it. And I just see that time and again. And it's not a knock, it's just the reality of it.
Yeah, that's the conundrum that we find a lot of organizations in. And I tell people sometimes you just got to stare at the wall for a bit and, turn off Outlook, put the phone on Do Not Disturb and just kind of stare at the wall and just let thoughts come to mind. And, it's why you have ideas in the shower or when you're in the bathroom or other places where you're just doing normal things. Sometimes innovative ideas just pop in there because you've actually slowed down enough to let those thoughts come to mind. And I think organizations, time and time again, that continue to thrive and grow are ones that create those opportunities. So you've got obviously one of the things about having you on the show is to talk about your book. So why don't you share a little bit about that? We're going to jump into a couple of the key components of the book.
Great. Yeah, thanks for asking about that, Michael. A colleague of mine, Walter Herbst, who is recently retired from Northwestern University, a faculty member there, but also a practitioner in design. He and his son have a design practice, Herbst Product. Walter and I collaborated to write a book called No Excuses Innovation, and the subtitle is Strategies for Small and Medium-Sized Mature Enterprises. So this is an innovation book, if you will, focused on the needs of these kinds of companies. Because they're often, if you're in a large organization, you have usually some infrastructure you can rely on. Small and medium-sized companies really have to either do it themselves, learn it themselves, or find some other way to bring that in. And so it's a unique situation. And when they're at risk, it's not only a challenge for that company and the ownership, financial implication, but really for economies, for local, region, and even national economies. And so Walter and I thought, how should we address this? And we included something in our book that I don't believe exists in any other innovation book. And it's really a clear upfront discussion of why innovate. Because so often when I work with companies, I see either the whole organization or pieces of the organization questioning or doubting the value of that investment, challenging it, if you will. And so we very systematically go through this understanding of, you know, there's a life cycle. You're going to start from emergence to growth and eventually at maturity. And when you're at maturity, you're either going to try to extend that, renew, or exit. And very few companies decide to renew. So we try to make this financial and organizational consideration of it. And then the rest of the book, and this is probably the bulk of the book, really is how to innovate. We talk about processes and tools, things like design thinking, I'd mentioned a moment ago, phase gate processes, things that people hear about, open innovation, lean innovation. You hear about these things, and if you're not familiar with them, we try to find ways to really connect with the readership and audience to very quickly go through all of these and show how they apply or could apply in these companies. Not saying that you need all the tools. It may turn out that a company needs just one or maybe one formal and two or three informal. And then finally, we do spend some time on the people. And again, that's been really where my interest has been over my whole career. How do you find these people? How do you identify them? And what do they look like as you develop them? And how do you develop really a pipeline of people? Um, and that's just as big of an investment, I think, as other things, capital investments.
Well, agreed. The people component of it is the one nugget that tends to be difficult for a lot of organizations, especially if they don't, if they know what they're looking for, but they're not quite sure how to put it to paper or a job post. And I posted on LinkedIn this morning. I saw a CEO posting, and the posting had 62 bullets on it,
Oh,
and I'm like, okay, I could be completely wrong on this, but probably not. I see that and I go, okay, that screams either micromanagement to the nth degree by the board, or they're looking for that magical unicorn that poops rainbows, because it was written as like we these are things we want to see. And for me, a lot of it was, well, those are intrinsic with somebody that's in that role. So it's like you're saying something you don't necessarily need to say per se. It's more of a what do you what do you want this person to do? I mean, yes, there's the day-to-day tasks. I get it. But if you want to be an innovative organization, if you want to grow the organization, because usually when there's an opening at the CEO level, there's a body that says, okay, we want to take the organization into a different direction, especially if they don't have, a succession plan internally. We're
Right.
like, okay, we know that, you know, Andy at Amazon, we knew for years was going to take over from Jeff. We knew that was coming. That was work. That was a work that was doing it and all of that. So we kind of knew that was going to happen. But when there's situations where it's not, and they're using recruitment firms to go out and find somebody, it's like, okay, what are you looking for? And they'll say, well, we want this, but it's like, but that's all just skills. Like, okay, they can write and they can type. Okay, that's great. But what about, how do you want this person to capture the essence of the organization, its mission, its vision, its values? How do they pull that out of the people they hire? How do they hire? That's a question that I was never asked when I was leading organizations. Never was asked, how do you hire people? When you're bringing on people on your team, what do you look for? That was never a question that was asked of me. And I think about that, I'm like, that's kind of weird in a way, because you're building a team. You would think that, and maybe they said, oh, well, they'll take care of it. They didn't want to get involved in it. But again, if you want an organization to be able to grow and make an impact, innovation is critical, and you need to know why. And I know your book does a great job of explaining, why organizations need to innovate, because if they don't, they're going to fade away at some point. And the how part of it is, I want to say, is easier than a lot of people think. But if you have an idea of what you want, it's just, following a recipe. Just like if you're going to make some kind of new dish, you've never made it before, you're going to hopefully follow a recipe. And it's the same thing with innovation. You figure out what works, adjust accordingly, and then from there, you adjust on the fly, or you adjust as, along the way. It's time and time again, I see organizations that do that. Even if they misstep, they're able to course correct. But then there's those organizations, and I know you see them all the time, that just won't innovate because they don't know even where to start, and they stay stuck.
It's a great point. There are a lot of organizations that, and I love the way you phrase it, they stay stuck. There's a, I don't, this is not meant to be disparaging. There's a certain amount of fear, uncertainty, concern about losing their investment. Um, in terms of moving forward, you make a great point about a process, and I want to maybe riff on that for a moment. Processes, especially in innovation, are good to instruct people who are new to innovation. These are the kinds of things you should look for. They're really good for experienced people because they remind them of a few nuggets that they may forget what to look for. But the process itself won't get you there. And that's why finding these people, and even in hiring, and as you were talking, it reminded me of an organization I worked with when they were looking to hire a new CEO. And they had a matrix, and the matrix was really great because it really put a discipline in the process of hiring. What are the important characteristics? What does it look like? But at the end of the day, and you need that to not forget things, to not miss things. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like the sommelier in a winery, that there's a connoisseurship in making these kinds of choices and decisions. And it's a very human and personal decision at that point. And and I'm not saying that to free people from any responsibility. But I think that, coming to know something at that depth of recognizing what's real and what's counterfeit, if you will, it takes time, and it takes time to develop that as a skill. And again, I keep going back to this idea of a very human skill. And when people have it, when many people in the organization have it, that's when cultures seem to really flourish in my experience.
Yeah, and culture is such a huge problem right now with retention, and I think a lot of it is obviously the dynamics of the leadership, management, and whatnot. But if there's no real clear map of
Hmm.
different ideas and innovative ideas, or even an ability to have a platform to share those ideas, people kind of get checked out. And we've seen it with the Gartner studies year after year. They say, less than, you know, 2 out of 10 people are fully engaged at work. And I see that and I go, we're in trouble. Because if you have that least amount of engaged people, there's not going to be any innovation. There's nothing going to be really new. And we're going to become stagnant as a society, not just in a workplace, but as a society. And like, how are we going to, all the great things that we are accustomed to using today that didn't exist 15 years ago or 20 years ago or even 5 years ago that are part of our daily lives, that took innovation. That took an idea. That took some testing. That took everybody working some late nights and
Yep.
ordering lots of pizzas at midnight and anything, adult beverages, whatever it happens to be to move some things forward. Because people wanted to do that because they saw something that was going to be potentially a game changer for society. And there's, the technology we're using right now didn't exist 20 years ago. I mean, not in this format. I'm sure it still did, but not in, this ease of use and affordability. And it's created opportunities and meetings and conversations really helpful during the pandemic for people to be able to see each other when we weren't allowed to do that in person. It's critical. So we need innovation. We need to encourage it. We need to invest in it. We need to demand it. And for candidates that are looking for new work, I mean, that's a question you ask because yes, the interviewer is asking you questions, but ask them, okay, what does innovation look like at this organization? What are some things you're doing to innovate? Now, if you're asking an accounting firm, I'm originally an accountant, creative accounting is not usually allowed, but that
Frowned on.
doesn't, yeah, it's kind of frowned on. Enron, there's a good example. But there are ways that you can be creative in how you do work, but you still, stay within the boundaries and the guidelines of tax law and accounting principles and all of that. That doesn't mean you can't be creative in the offerings you give to your clients, how you work, your work environment, different techniques and tools. Innovation can still be there, even in the accounting office, kids.
Yeah.
I know it's surprising, but you have to be kind of thinking outside of it and going, you know what? Start with no rules. Okay, there's no guidelines. Let's put it together, then narrow it in and say, okay, what can we do? But again, it's that playground. It brings back to something I think that's missing in a lot of organizations, unfortunately, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is curiosity.
Yeah.
And curiosity is a big component of innovation. You got to be curious. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, let me discuss that, and then I don't want to forget to come back to some of the other things you said if there's time. It's in terms of curiosity, it's interesting because your timing's great. I've been actually reflecting on this idea or question of what role curiosity plays, and I think it's a good word and descriptor. I think it plays an important role, but I think that if we tell people be curious um, it doesn't necessarily accomplish as much as we'd like. It may pick up a few things. To encourage curiosity, I think it's a good thing, but it doesn't pick up everything. And where I'm going with this is that the people who have been most successful at innovation that I've observed over time are ones that see patterns that are out there. They see patterns in um, what the market needs are, customer needs, how they aggregate into market needs. They see patterns in what, if you will, technology that's available, if it's technology enabled product, what manufacturing capabilities, accounting. Are there certain ways to do things that if you have mastery of all these things, you see? And so the people who are, again, most innovative, they see these patterns and then the curiosity isn't just, and I don't want to say you're suggesting that it's random, but the curiosity is directed at making sense of those patterns. And a good way to illustrate this is because it's something that many people are familiar with. If you watch a detective show on TV, and they've got these walls with all the photographs and the strings attaching them. Detectives do this every day. Physicians do this when they're diagnosing. They're looking for patterns. And so the curiosity is towards making sense of those patterns. This act of innovation is a very intentional act. And so sometimes I don't use the word curiosity because I want to set aside the more general view of it. I might call it inquisitiveness, but again, it's you're either looking for missing dots or you're looking for patterns. And it's a focused form of curiosity. So I agree with you. It's there. And the difference between those who are successful and unsuccessful is this intentionality that I see. It's a big difference.
Being intentional about what you do, I think, goes a long way. And it's too often, and I think a lot of this, boils down to it could be overwhelm, it could be burnout, it could be a lot of different things. But uh, too often we see people basically hit the autopilot button.
Yeah.
And it's like you're missing out on things because and if you are overwhelmed, then there are ways to not be. It's because, I see time and time again, you could have two people doing the same job. One's overwhelmed, the other one is soaring and flying, and same workloads, same
Yep.
demographics, all that. So you go, okay, what's the difference? Yeah, let's connect the dots and figure out why is one thriving over the other, and it could be experiences, past experiences, home life, financial situation. There could be so
Yep.
many different ingredients, but you won't know unless you start looking and seeing, and you create environments where, as best you can, as an employer, to help that individual help themselves. Create an environment where they can work through it so they can get back to being creative and productive, which they want to do. I think most people want to be productive and creative and make an impact where they work. And if you create an environment that allows for that, it goes a long way. And whenever I hear say, employers are burning me out, it's like, is everybody burned out, or is it just a couple? And it's it's one of those things like blanket statements can be very very scary to just across the board and say it's this. It's like not necessarily. Us humans are complex beings, and you can have an organization, small to mid-sized, that can have all kinds of different flavors, excuse me, of things going on. But ultimately, it boils down to, who are we? What are we trying to accomplish? How are we doing it? How are we, bringing our team together to accomplish this for the greater good of everybody involved?
Yeah, this is fascinating because as you're describing this idea of helping people help themselves, and I like that it's a pithy way to put it. And I also think back earlier in our conversation, you spoke about motivation. And one of the other things that I've observed is that the people who are really the best innovators are really self-motivated. And I think that's entirely consistent with what you've been saying. And they're self-motivated to solve customer problems, and in doing so, to help their colleagues stay employed, to help the company succeed financially. So they're serving all these people, they're helping other people. And where there are problems in organizations is more often, not entirely, more often where people are demotivated. And I learned several years ago that being motivated is not the opposite of being demotivated. Those are two different beasts and they need to be treated, somewhat independently in your thinking. And again, what you're saying now reminds me of that and how relevant it is to this idea of getting the organization to move forward. And, I've seen so many situations where, it takes so little within an organization to put the brakes on things. It can be one person, if you will, standing there, keeping things from happening. Um, and inappropriately keeping things from happening is really what I'm saying. I don't want to say that it's always bad, but having that insight to know when to push and when not to, and it's all part of this because like any change in an organization, innovation involves renewal, and it involves a lot of change for everybody involved.
We all know that everybody loves to change. I say that
Yeah,
sarcastically, of
I
course.
had a colleague once say when we were looking for a new dean at the university that everybody wanted someone to come in to change the organization. And then my colleague paused and she said, but they want everybody else to change, not themselves. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's,
Us humans, we're a complex bunch. So,
yeah.
Bruce, love this conversation. Where can people find out more about you and all this amazing work you're doing?
Yeah, great. Michael, thanks. I have a small consulting practice, Breakthrough Innovation Advisors. I have a website, so if you Google that name or my name, you'll find that. You'll find this book that I talked about, No Excuses Innovation, and also an earlier book I co-authored on innovators and again mature companies called Serial Innovators. Those are both published by Stanford University Press, and they're both available on Amazon and also at the press, and they're both also audiobooks if people are inclined. And then obviously LinkedIn. You know, if you do a search for my last name on LinkedIn, there aren't too many Vojaks in the world, so it should be easy to find me.
There you go. And I'll help people out and I'll have the links in the show notes. So they don't even have to look it up online. They can just click on the link and it'll take you right there. So Bruce,
Michael, thanks.
thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it and enjoyed this conversation. So thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks, pleasure.